What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 98 of the Steam Deck Podcast, Let's Screen Games weekly gaming podcast, all about Valve's portable PC powerhouse, the Steam Deck. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Steven Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Steve. Welcome back.
It's good to be back. Yeah, I missed last week. You and Max had a great episode all about the future of gaming being handhelds, but it's nice to be back talking all about Steam again.
Yeah, I was pretty pleased, because like every once in a while when you do an episode like that, I'm just like, this is gonna bring out a certain type of commenter, right? Who's like got very angry energy, probably doesn't listen to the show. And instead it did the exact opposite, which maybe I should have anticipated since we have a show about Steam Deck and a show about Nintendo Switch. And everybody was like, hell yeah, bro. Yeah, Max is right. The future is handheld. And I was like, all right, baby. Yeah, you guys were down for this message, which I loved. It was a really fun episode. It was a fun thought experiment to work through with Max. So.
Yeah, it was a good one.
But I'm glad to have you back because I think this is going to be a good one. I was very excited this week. You and I had our weekly production meeting, and you were like, okay. And I was like, what are we talking about on Steam Deck? And you were like, I want to talk about Dragon Age. And I was like, all right, let's go, baby. What a week. What a week for your boy.
Yeah, I wonder if people who don't listen to our sister show, the Flip Screen Games podcast, know that Dragon Age is probably your favorite video game franchise.
I would guess because we did that short, and I think I put that out on the Steam Deck podcast feed initially. So, I mean, some of you probably listened to that and know that. But yeah, if you're a regular listener of the show, not the rest of them, Dragon Age is been one of my favorite franchises through all its ups and downs since I was a teenager, and I'm currently replaying all of them in anticipation of Veilguard. I'm very much looking forward to it, and I know for some PC players there's concern with certain elements of it, but I've been spending a lot of time in the Dragon Age subreddit lately, and it's been nice to be there among a lot of fans who are also very excited and positive like I am. So yeah, I know you wanted to talk about it because we had the interesting news come out this past week that it's already Steam Deck verified.
Yeah, so yet more positive news for this game. EA put out a post saying that not only is it Steam Deck verified, which we'll get onto, maybe you need to take that with a bit of a grain of salt,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
also that it's going to be, I think, probably bigger news that it's Steam native. This is the first time EA's put a game out in a very long time that does not require the EA app. And the EA app, if you remember, is their custom launcher, and it boots up before pretty much every other game that they've got on Steam. And it's caused problems. We've had updates to the Steam app before, the EA app before. This meant that games that previously ran on the Steam Deck no longer run on the Steam Deck, and they've had to like repatch them in
That
order
was
to
a
get
big
them to
problem with,
work.
Star Wars. I can never
Star Wars
remember.
Jedi Survivor.
Survivor, yeah, and the other one's Fallen Order. I can
Yeah.
I can never remember because, like, when you think about it, like, in Fallen Order, you're, like, the last surviving one of the last surviving Jedi, so it's like Survivor, like, that could easily be the title, right? Like, that's not that crazy.
But yeah, it's been a big issue, and it's not just an EA only issue. Ubisoft used the Ubisoft Connect launcher that they've got. Bethesda's had their own launcher in the past, so it's kind of par for the course with these big publishers that they've got their own thing. But EA seemingly the first big publisher to say we're going to drop it and we're no longer going to include it in at least Dragon Age: The Veilguard. Whether this becomes a trend for future titles of theirs, I would imagine it would.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, I guess dependent on how sales of this one are, 'cause I guess there's kinda, like, a few ways you can interpret that. It's either them wanting to, I guess kind of concede, right? That, like, the game's sales are going to be hampered by not having it
Hmm.
release on Steam, which is, I'm sure, that's true of any video game, right? But I'm sure that they have data that shows that that's been the case for the last several releases that didn't come out on Steam, right? But then
Well,
I also
EA's got like a very unique partnership with Steam, and that EA Play is a part of Steam as well. So they've been putting their games on Steam for a long time now, but they've all been kind of held back by the EA launcher
there's
itself.
there's an extra hoop, right?
Yeah.
And we know, right, from personal experience and from listening to our audience talk about, right, like why they want games to be Steam native. That yeah, that there are just lots of problems that come with it, right? And so yeah, maybe it's not fair to say that they haven't launched on Steam, but they've launched on Steam asterisk, right?
Mhm.
And I think that I pulled a quote here from Matt Piscatella, who's a video games analyst. That if you're a frequent games Twitter person, you're probably familiar with his name. He gets quote tweeted a lot, and he said that he believed that the decision would quote lead to significant additional sales, and he said quote the marginal benefit of forcing people to use a proprietary PC marketplace just isn't worth the additional lost volume of not putting a game on Steam. So I think despite the fact that there is kind of like this workaround, I think there is kind of that perception of like, yeah, like if I need to use the EA launcher, even if it opens through Steam, it's not quite Steam native. And I
Yeah.
think particularly if you're somebody that wants to play your games on deck, right? Like you've had probably had firsthand experience of this coming up and taking a game that you were enjoying and pausing your progress with it because all of a sudden it didn't work on your Steam Deck anymore until there was an update. Um,
Yeah, well, I know my dad's had problems with the Fallout Next Gen update as well, in that you had to kind of press something on the screen, but if you were docked, then you couldn't press it because, like, you obviously didn't have the touchscreen in order to do that unless you went into like the controller configuration to do it. And so it's just like it's just extra hassle, and I don't think anyone likes these. I don't know why it was a trend because it's not like in this instance that they're even selling the game on their own store. Yeah, you can buy it on the EA store if you want to, I would imagine. At least you could with their previous titles, but they were selling the games on Steam anyway. What did they
I
kind of gain by having it launch their launcher and then launch the game?
I think to me it reads very similarly to what we've kind of seen the last couple of years with streamers, with like television and film, right? Where it's like, you know, um, there's been this kind of like rush for every IP holder to be like, us too. We also have an app
Mhm.
that you can pay $5 a month for. And I think that, while there have been examples of that like actually working, right? Like because certain, IP holders like do
Well,
have
like
a library.
Disney owns everything, so it's like
Right.
they've done well, but, I don't know anyone that's subscribing to Paramount Plus.
There was a similar kind of like gold rush in games where they're like, oh, like, we got to get a launcher out there because we want a piece of that pie. And I think ultimately, as time has proven, right? Like, not even Epic with, their billions of dollars to fund into trying to create a competitor, right? Like,
They
I think
truly
it's,
half-assed it though, because it's like
yeah.
it's a web store rather than like a decent app, and then you download the app and they're just kinda shoving Fortnite in your face all the
Mhm.
time, and you just go there
And
to
being
launch
like,
the game.
get a free game. You want a free game?
Yeah, that's the only reason I ever used the Epic Games Store was like, "Oh, I can go get,
Right.
these games every single month for free,
But
and if it's one that I want, then I'll do it."
point being, right, I think that just having a storefront, unless, you were one of the few that people deemed acceptable, right? Like I feel like battle.net kind of like got away with it because they were around for so long. So it was always like, okay,
Even
like
then, do you remember when they tried bringing Activision games over to it, and in order to get Call of Duty, you had to get it through the Battle.net launcher?
and nobody like that.
And no one wanted that. It's
Right.
only because, like, "Oh, I'm playing World of Warcraft, I guess I'll use their launcher." Because you
Right.
don't you 'cause that you can kind of understand, you're paying for it separately, it's their own thing, it's not gonna be coming via Steam for a subscription. So,
But point being is I think that the amount of those that people were willing to accept were few and far between,
yeah.
and, like, no shade to EA or Ubisoft or any of these other companies, but I think that ultimately the whole, like, you can spend $5 a month to access the entire EA library, it's like, I just don't think that's a great value proposition. Like, people would rather just buy the games they want to buy from you, right? Because it's like, I love Mass Effect and Dragon Age, I don't care about almost any other thing they put out, you know? And that's not because they're oh, I mean, I guess I like the Star Wars game too, but like point being, two of their developers make things that are
Mhm.
catered to my interest, and each of them puts out games like once every decade now. Or like I guess in Respawn's case, like they're on a quicker timeline than that, but
Yeah, God
even
knows
so.
now.
But even so, right? It's like if I had been paying for that service for years or whatever, right? Like it's like
Well, but even if you weren't paying for the service, you bought the game on Steam, you're stuck launching their shitty launcher that comes with features that you don't really want. Is probably slowing your
Right.
computer
But
down.
but
It's
I
just
guess
like, what's the point?
that's kind of my point, right? Is like unless you're locking someone into an ecosystem, it doesn't make sense. And I think that
Which is what they all
probably
wanted to do, and that's why we
yeah.
saw companies like Ubisoft taking their games off of Steam. They're slowly bringing back older games, but we're not going to see Star Wars Outlaws launch on Steam later
And
this year. That's coming exclusively to the Ubisoft Connect launcher.
I think when you're talking about multiplayer games, I can see that why they would have had that desire because it's like imagine, battle.net like went away right a while ago and they rolled in World of Warcraft to being a Steam game or something like that. Well, that would mean that like every time that they got their, subscription from you, like Steam would have taken a cut, right? So it's like I'm sure that was, like something like Overwatch, right? Where it's like, okay, well, when Overwatch was the biggest game in the world for a year or so, right? Like all of those times that you paid for, cosmetics or paid to roll the dice to see if you were going to get, that next Halloween skin drop or whatever, right? Like all those that money went directly into their pocket and not through a third party servicer.
Mhm.
So it's like, I get why they wanted to do it, but I think it's just something that consumers were utterly resistant to because unless your game was so hot that people couldn't ignore it, right? Then it's like, yeah, like fine, I'll go download your crappy launcher. Like the only reason that that whole EA partnership, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my memory of that is that they took their games uh, to go do their launcher, and when it wasn't successful was when they brought them back to Steam. So, like, I think that if that had paid dividends, they probably wouldn't be on Steam, but they probably decided to work this out because, to Steam, it's like, well, yeah, we'd rather have the games on our launcher than not. And to them, it was, like Piscatella pointed out, it's just one of those things where the benefit of forcing somebody into this walled garden was not worth it in exchange for like fewer
Mhm.
sales, right? And like not being able to be a part of stuff like the Steam summer sale and all those kinds of things, and that's not a great example with EA, right? Because like you said, like you can buy those games through Steam, but like with Ubisoft or something like that, for example, like there's a reason they're bringing those games back to Steam now, and it's because there's money to be made by just being on Steam.
Well, they got those fat bucks from Epic, which I'm sure helped as well,
Yeah, but we
for
we
for
talked
that
about that.
year-long exclusivity, but
We
we
talked about
saw
that a
that with
while ago. They're
Final
not doing that
Fantasy as
anymore.
well. Yeah, but even with Final Fantasy, had a year over there, and then it got, like, another renaissance when it came to Steam, and everyone was
Uh huh.
excited about it. And just to confirm, you were right, EA took their games off of Steam in 2011 and forced people over to what was known as the Origin store then. It's since
Right.
been renamed the EA app. And then they brought they came back in 2019 with Jedi Fallen Order, and then the EA Play subscription service launched in 2020.
So there you
So
go, right? So it's like it's only within the last couple of years that they decided that like, hey, this isn't working, right? It's not worth it, and we can make more money selling our back catalog, even if they take a cut on their storefront than trying to force people into ours. You know?
yeah, so EA apparently said that they blamed Steam's set of business terms for developers for preventing the release of the game. Um, Due to a deal Crysis 2 developer Crytek had with another service. So they
Mm.
said that they couldn't release it there because I guess Crytek had done a deal with another company. And then after that, they just, went off on their own. And that's seemingly what happened with Ubisoft. We saw the same thing with Activision. But since Microsoft's kind of bought Activision out, we've seen those games come back. Even Diablo 4 came to Steam natively and doesn't require the Battle.net launcher.
Overwatch 2 did as well, right? And that
Yeah.
happened after Overwatch 2 was struggling because I think they thought that that was going to be a way to, inflate player counts and try to give it a shot in the arm. Was like you pointed out about I forget what game you even said, but the one that had a second renaissance when it came to
Final Fantasy
Final
7.
Fantasy, right? Thank you. Right, like it was able to kind of have like three separate launches, you know.
Yeah, it had the PlayStation launch, then it had the initial wave when it came to the Epic Game Store, and then finally the big wave when it came to Steam. But I really think that Matt Piscatella's on the money. Companies really seem to miss out. I don't think something like Helldivers 2, for example, would have had the big launch it would have had if PlayStation had gone, right, we need you to download our custom launcher and you've got to buy it on the
Yeah,
PlayStation Store.
definitely.
And it wouldn't have been in the charts. We wouldn't have seen everyone talking about it. It was
Mhm.
number one on Steam. You opened up your Steam Deck, it was front and center on the page, and you could click buy and you could view the footage. You could see people streaming it. Steam is where people go when they think about video games on PC
Definitely.
and handheld now. It's like I'm thinking about playing a game and I want to see it front and center there. And if EA is launching a game that is Steam Deck verified, it makes sense to me that they would want to launch it natively on Steam and would want to remove as much friction as possible for the player.
Right, and I also think that this was the other thing I was gonna say is that I think the other thing that this potentially suggests, right, is that, like, EA maybe has concerns about the amount of, like, units that this game is, like, gonna sell versus how much they think it is capable of selling, right? Where it's like, obviously, I said at the top, I love Dragon Age. I'm a big Dragon Age guy. Dragon Age was always the less popular series from BioWare in comparison to Mass Effect, right? Which is already, you know, a very, very beloved, very popular franchise in its own right, but it's not Call of Duty, right? It's not that mass market. And I think that a lot of the changes that they're making to the combat and trying to streamline things and everything, right, is like partly in an effort to like
Make it more broadly appeal to people, yeah.
yeah, to try and I think like show that this is like a good time to jump on as a new fan, right? And that like, all the stuff that they're talking about from a story and lore perspective and everything, I think is very much going to speak to the players that are already in and that already care about Dragon Age. And I don't think that that'll be a problem. But I think that a lot of the kind of decisions being made around that are very much like, hey, like, this is the fourth game in the franchise, right? And the first one happened 2 console generations ago. There's no way for you to play it in the modern era that isn't, you playing a game that came out in 2006, right? So like I don't think the expectation is that you're going to go through the entire series and then jump into this one. I think it's very much like, hey, like if you've already been on this journey, then great, it's the next one. And if not, then what a perfect time for you to jump in. And I do think that like having this extra hoop of like not having it be native on Steam is yet another thing that would, if you're somebody who's like, well, I'm on the fence. I kind of want to check it out, but I've never played any of the other ones. I don't want to use the EA launcher. I think those are all things that they're little things, but if you're somebody who's on the fence, that could nudge you over. And I think that's the same reason that they probably want to have it Steam Deck verified day and date is that it's going to get prominent placement on the on deck page and that the millions of players that are on Steam Deck are going to be like when they're looking for the next big RPG to play, right? Like that's
Mhm.
that's hopefully going to be the one that they pick. And I think that there's a very good chance that that ends up being the case, if the game comes out and lands well and reviews are good and it's on the, top 10, most actively played games on Steam Deck
I
and
think
it's
it's gonna be number 1. I think it's gonna be number 1 that week. I think it's probably gonna be the number 1 played game on Steam that week. And you mentioned that, maybe they're worried about sales not meeting expectations. I think there's a distinct possibility about that, and we'll
I
talk
mean, and
about
again,
when
like
we
worried, right? Quote unquote.
yeah.
It's like, what does that mean? Right. It's like, putting, want to put your hand on the scale to ensure sales
You
is
wanna
different
tip
than,
it tip it as much as you can in your
right.
favor, but we'll talk a little bit about when we think it's gonna launch in a moment, but, we've got some big games coming out in the back half of this year. We've got Star Wars Outlaws, which I think is probably gonna be the game that this is going up against, head to head against. That game
Depending
not
on
coming to
timeline,
I
though,
think
because
it's probably gonna come out same month, if not within a couple of weeks of one another.
yeah, I think the latter on that makes sense to me
And,
more.
to have a game that's native on Steam versus you've got to go and download the Ubisoft Connect launcher and buy it from their store instead, really garners you favor with the PC
Yeah,
market.
it's a good point.
Yeah, players might be playing that game on Xbox or PlayStation, but I want to play that game on my Steam Deck. Well, you can't play that because it's not Steam Deck native. Maybe you could jump through the hoops and install it via Lutris or install it via Heroic Launcher or something on desktop mode. But why would you bother when the other big game this year is Dragon Age: The Veilguard, and you can just install it natively from Steam itself?
Mhm. definitely. Yeah, I think that I mean, from your lips to God's ears, my friend. I
I gotta
would
say, Pete, this has made me more inclined to try it now that I know
Oh,
it's Steam Deck verified. But we got to remember, and we got to take that with a grain of salt, because I remember pre-ordering The Last of Us Part One last year
right.
because it was Steam Deck verified ahead of launch, and I was very excited about it. I was like, "Oh, it's Steam Deck verified. I trust that. It means Valve's probably tested this and have kind of decided that it works." But then we famously, or maybe infamously, saw Valve strip that title from them and mark it as unsupported. So, do you think that Valve has maybe learned from that experience and now they're a little bit more cautious and that this game actually will play?
I think that this game is going to be the test of what the answer to that question is, because I think that if this game comes out and it has, like, a somewhat similar situation, right, where it comes out and it just doesn't work at launch or, it works in a very, very, memeable, compromised state, then I think at that point, we can kind of cement the opinion that deck verification doesn't mean much, and that when it's a big, major publisher looking to um, push out a big game that is supposed to sell a bunch of copies and be a game of the year contender and all that stuff, that they can pretty much just cut the line and get their game put on the on deck page and featured in sizzle reels and all that stuff, even though it doesn't really work. And I you know, I am torn between wanting to expect better of Valve and think that they will be capable of having learned their lesson because they had such a very public blunder with The Last of Us Remastered, which just, you know, that's all anyone talked about for a while. And it was like a thing that that game then had to overcome, right, as a reputation. And I think that I can't imagine that they are happy about that as a talking point among the
No,
fans.
I
The
mean, it
idea
very
that
much
it means
reminded.
nothing and that it's a
Mhm.
bullshit PR thing is like they that can't be their intention for that system.
Yeah, I mean, it very much reminded me of the Cyberpunk moment where it's just like, well, how the fuck did this game pass the PlayStation Store vetting process? Like that was meant to stop this kind of thing from ever happening. That's what what why we buy PlayStation. That's why we trust the brands. Why we buy Xbox. Why we trust the brand. Why did that not happen? And that's kind of how I think a lot of people saw the Steam Deck verified badge. That it was just like, oh, it's Valve's accreditation. They're testing it. They're making sure it works. So that when I spend £70 on a game, that I know it's going to work and I trust it, And in the case of The Last of Us, remember we had that big, like, 1 hour process where it was compiling the shaders before you could even play the game, which ate into your 2 hour window that you got in order to refund it. So by the time you'd got to the point where you realized this game's fucking garbage on the Steam Deck, you couldn't actually refund the game. Now, thankfully, Valve's customer service is very good, and they did honor it and just say, yeah, we know that this was an absolute dumpster fire, but I don't. I think you're right. They don't want to go through that process again. It eats away at their brand. It eats away not just Valve and Steam, but the Steam Deck brand. It becomes like, oh, and what's the point? I'm not even going to bother trying it because I'm going to wait until other people try it.
And I think it de-incentivizes developers to work on Steam Deck targeted modes because then like it become like you said, right? It's like if everyone's like, "Oh yeah, whatever, it's deck verified," then it's like, "All right, well then why do I even push for that as a marketing beat?" You don't, right? Because it doesn't mean anything. So, I think I want to say that based on that, I am more confident that this will be playable in a stable state rather than not. Um, but I mean, it's tough because like this is gonna be a really big game, right? Like,
Hmm.
Dragon Age Inquisition. I mean, obviously, this is gonna be, I think, scaled back from what that game was because it was, very bloated open world. And this is supposed to be more like mission based, but they have said that this has more recorded, dialogue than any other BioWare game previously. So the idea that it's this game that has, seemingly a lot of, branching content and a lot of different stuff, um, that can kind of, there's a lot of different flags to be triggered, right? So, like, with that in mind, that requires a lot of testing to really understand, like, how well the thing performs, right? So, like, the idea that it might, in a similar way, achieve Steam Deck verification based on a vertical slice of, like, playing the first 10 hours of the game or something like that, right? It's like, I mean, you know, a game like this sometimes doesn't even open up until the first 10 hours of the game, right? Like, think about Baldur's Gate, right? Where, like, Baldur's Gate 3, the first 2 acts are pretty playable on Steam Deck with a few small modifications, right? And it's not much of a problem at all. But most people talk about how the 3rd act doesn't run particularly well on deck because there's just a lot of models on screen, there's a lot of detail, a lot of depth. That doesn't mean that that's like a rule across the board,
Hmm.
but I could see a similar thing happening here where it's like, if you play the first 30 hours of this game, you may have only seen a third of it, right? So, like, does that actually, how hard is it to actually get to a point where you're very confident that the game is totally playable without issue? Um, so I,
It's tough. It is tough because I don't think anyone can really expect the whole game to be played, but whether EA can provide them with saves at specific points in the game that they can then jump into in the same way that they would to any other game tester. Now, there's a little bit more information available on the testing that's been done for Dragon Age: The Veilguard on SteamDB. So it was tested on the 25th of July, and it basically has passed with flying colors. Apparently, all functionality is accessible using the default controller configuration. The game shows Steam Deck controller icons. In-game interface text is legible on Steam Deck. The game's default graphics configuration performs well on Steam Deck. The only thing is it doesn't support HDR, but whether that's just for the build that they've tested on the 25th of July or not. Now, I'm curious, Pete, because in the blog post that they put out, where they ended it with saying details on launch coming later this summer. We're we're getting close to the end of summer, I would say. End of August is probably coming up towards the end of summer. When do you think we're going to hear about this, and when do you think this game's going to launch?
so they've been very consistent saying that the game is coming in the fall. So if the idea is, all right, like, we're gonna talk about it in the summer, right? Like, I mean, it's August now. So I think the idea that, I guess it depends on when in the fall it's launching. Because, if it's a late fall game, then, I probably wouldn't expect to hear about it in full until the end of August, right? Because if it's, like, say, coming out in November, right, then it's like, all right, like, that's still several months away. Even if you talk about it at the end of August, you could be 3 months out from release, and which I don't think is unreasonable.
Does that
Um,
not seem strange though to test the game on the 25th of July, but then and say get it Steam Deck verified, but then not put it out until November?
it does, but I mean, you know, I think there's just so much context to this release that I like. It's hard for me to not overanalyze it a little bit, because there was a quote from the team working on the game recently where they were like, they were quoted as saying that the reason that the game took as long as it did was because they knew how important it was to get it right. Right? It's like, you think about the trajectory BioWare has been on, right, for the last, I mean, 2 console generations, right? Like, um, I am a big defender of Mass Effect 3, but for most of the people who are outside of being a fan of those games, like, the perception is that 3 was received in a mixed way because there was the
Mhm.
controversy over the ending of the game. I don't think that that really matters, if I'm honest. The game still reviewed exceptionally well. It sold exceptionally well. To me, that was kind of a vocal minority.
But I
Like,
feel like that was maybe their last swan song, right? And after that, it's kind of been downhill from
my
there.
point was gonna be, that is the last game, and even though that has a contested kind of element to it, that's the last game they put out that was, received well, right? Like, Anthem was obviously a very public failure, and then Mass Effect Andromeda was also not well received, and that was like, supposed to be like a planned trilogy of on its own, and
Mm.
the reception of the game was just not there. So I think that this game has a lot of pressure on it to succeed, not only just as a regular video game and as the fourth game in a beloved franchise, but as, like, this is the game that needs to be, a quintessential BioWare game. It needs to
But
come out
it
and
seems like it's going to be there. Like it's had a bit of a tortured development cycle from what I've heard, right? That it
yeah.
essentially started out as live service game and then pivoted to something else. And obviously we knew it as
My
one title, and now it's had a rename.
My
And
understanding of it is that I think this is technically now the third version of it, because the original version of it was this is a standard BioWare game follow up to Dragon Age Inquisition. It's Dragon Age 4 as you would expect it to have been. And then that got canned in favor of the version that you're talking about that Jason Schreier wrote about, which was a live service, like Anthem style game. And then that got scrapped. And then we restarted development on this version of the game, which has obviously gone through its own, trials and tribulations, like key members of the team leaving and coming back, and um, yeah, quite a bit of turbulence, right? But I think that all that aside, like from what I've seen and what they've said, it does seem like it's going to check all the boxes that like I really care about. I know that there are some of the the PC crowd that are upset in the direction for combat, and that we're not, going back to a more like CRPG Dragon Age Origins style of combat. But that's, the in my opinion, the franchise has been moving away from that ever since that release anyway. The combat in that is very divisive because if you're not a PC player and you played it on console, it didn't play that way anyway. And for a lot of people, they don't like that kind of game. So it's like, I think it's
a
one of
lot of
those
people
things where
do though. Baldur's Gate 3 really
you're
hit
right,
last
but
year.
my point is that Dragon Age is a franchise that has 3 entries, and there are just as many people that think that two's combat is better than 1, or
Mhm.
three's combat is, whatever, right? Like, it's like your mileage may vary, and regardless of where you fall on that spectrum, the thing about Dragon Age that has always been the core of the franchise is not the combat. It's the and that's true of Mass Effect as well. And I like the combat in Mass Effect and in some of the Dragon Age games, but at the end of the day, I'm not there playing for the combat. I'm there playing for the story, the lore, the dialogue, the voice acting, the performances. Like that's what those games are about, right? It's about role playing and having agency in a story, right? And experiencing a great sci-fi or fantasy epic. And based on what we've seen, like I feel like they seem to have put focus in the right places. So, I feel like there's a lot of things that I think are looking good, but I also definitely know that a lot of people, probably a lot of people listening to this, even if are a fan of those games, have reservations, and reservations that I think are like, well founded based on what's happened over the last, 2 generations. So it's like, I think when you think about all of that context, it's like maybe, right? And again, this is just my prognostication. The reason that this is verified now is because they want to make sure that they have time to work out all the kinks on every version of the game. And that when it does launch in the fall, even if that's a few months later than it was ready, that it wasn't rushed out, that they had enough time to squash bugs, that they have enough time to have a really sizable day one patch that deals with any of the kind of like normal launch woes that any big AAA game goes through, because they know that this game is going to be under a microscope, and that anything that you can come at it for is going to be something that people will be looking to magnify, in the same way that that's already happened with the like controversy over the combat, or the controversy over like people perceiving a different tone based on a 30-second vertical slice trailer that wasn't even like from the game, right? Like it's like people are already heaping so much expectation and reading into everything that like I wouldn't blame them to want to have a very tight timeline of like, we're going to reveal the game, we're going to tell you exactly what we're ready to tell you at the end of the summer, and then the game is going to come out in the fall. And that like they're doing the best they can to get all of their ducks in a row, all their dominoes lined up, so that when they are ready to make that announcement, that it's not a leak, it's not a this, it's not a that, right? That like their side of the street is clean, and that the game can succeed or fail on its own merits and not around some narrative surrounding it that has nothing to do with its quality.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. They just, I really think this game's probably coming sooner rather than later. I think it's probably dropping in September, is my gut feeling. We keep seeing little tidbits like this. There was also an interview that the creative director did with Games Radar this week, talking about how it's got 700 characters and 140,000 lines of dialogue in the
Yes, it
game.
does, baby.
So it's like talking about those things, it's like, you're really kind of doing these kind of press tours now already, getting out ahead of it. I think we're probably gonna see a big reveal, probably 2nd or 3rd week of August would be my guess, ahead of Star Wars Outlaws, and that Star Wars Outlaws have the kind of space, because I don't think that they wanna be overshadowed by that. And then 2 or 3 weeks after that game, which drops at the end of August, release Dragon Age, would be my guess.
So, totally anecdotal. Dragon Age 1 and Dragon Age 3 both came out in November. Dragon Age 2 came out in March. So, who knows? Might mean nothing, but might mean something.
Yeah, possibly. I think that November feels so far away. I don't know, it's strange to me that you would make a song and dance about being Steam Deck verified now, and then wait until November.
So,
It feels like you're kind of letting the air out of the room.
the only thing with that is that Steam Deck verification is something that is compulsory, right? Like, if you take a look at the, guide that Valve has for, like, submitting your game, you can request to have a game reviewed before it's like while it's unreleased, but there is kind of like a process for like once you request a game to be verified, they have like a certain amount of time to do so. They submit a report to you, and then you have like kind of a tiered series of actions that you can take. Like if the game is returned as not verified, you're able to make whatever adjustments you need to make to ensure verification. And then if you don't, but basically there's like a certain amount of time within that, like once it's been submitted as verified and you don't want to make any additional adjustments, then that they publish that information. So unless I'm misunderstanding what I read there, I would interpret that as it almost isn't up to you, right? Like once you submit your game to be verified, they will announce that it has been verified or whatever its status is, regardless of your intent. So like if you're a developer wanting to get your game Steam Deck verified because you think that being number one on Steam and being on the On Deck store and all those things that we just talked about are going to be really beneficial to your game's launch and help your sales, right? I think it stands to reason that uh say you submitted that now and you got back, oh, there's all these problems that mean it's not going to be deck verified. And now you have a certain amount of time to adjust them. Well, if your game is launching in September, that's like 4 weeks to get that work done. Whereas if it's launching in November, you're actually doing it early enough that you have like a quarter of work to get done, to get that work done when the game is seemingly already in a very complete state and you're already like squashing bugs elsewhere. So like I could see that being the reason, and the reason that they're like, "Hey, we're Steam Deck verified," is because well, Valve is going to publish this information either way, and we can either have a statement about it or not. And if we don't, IGN and everyone else is going to write about it anyway, and then people are going to ask us about it, and it's good, and so it could just be that you knew this was going to happen, so you put a tweet out about it, right? Like I don't know. You're looking at the same page I am. Do you interpret that differently?
So I think you're broadly right, but there is a question that says, can you hold off publishing my compatibility test results until we fix some of the issues you found, or until we complete an optimization pass, or until our internal QA department completes their own tests? Um, and it says we don't support delaying the publishing of compatibility tests for future work. But if you receive your compatibility test results and submit a new build of your game that addresses those issues before the results are published, we will delay the publication of your results and retest your new build.
Right.
So
But that's my point though, right? So like again, if we are BioWare and we submitted this in July anticipating that there would be some problems and then it came back and it's like actually no, it's deck verified and you don't need to change anything, like it already works, then right, like in those things that you listed, none of them are I've gotten my game deck verified, but I'm not ready to announce that yet. as a solution. So my understanding there would be that if they were trying to do it to get ahead of like needing to get work done so that it actually worked, and it just didn't need that work, then or again, maybe they submitted it earlier in July and they like did get notes back and then they did that work and now it's like, all right, great. Well, we thought it would take more effort than it did, and now it's announced a few weeks ahead of our proper reveal.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess that, then you can also take advantage of the beat to say that we're kind of ditching the launcher. I want to come back to that actually. Do you think this is going to pave the way now, and that we no longer see launches from other companies, or do you think this is, EA is an outlier here?
You know what, Steve? I'm going to answer that question in just a second. But before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of the Steam Deck podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of July. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Lenz, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Sobe, Snackigo, Steve Stumpy, Susan Likes Cats and also Boobies, Ty the Dude, Voodoo Vic, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. You all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. If you want to go and show that support, if you want to go check out our sister shows, Nintendo Noise and the Flip Screen Games podcast, or if you just want to join the community, you can do all that and much more by heading over to flipscreen.games. Go over there and click on some stuff. It helps us out a lot, and it won't cost you a pretty penny unless you want to get all kinds of cool perks and goodies like early access to the show. However you choose to get involved or show your support, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Steam Deck podcast. I kind of think maybe. I think like similar to the example I brought up earlier about like streamers, I feel like whenever there's a new kind of like way to consume media or a new like wave in distribution or something like that, you always kind of see this happen, right? Like you even saw it in video games during like the original market crash where like, oh, there's money to be made in be having an app, in having our own proprietary storefront. There's money to be
Yeah.
made in this whatever, right? So you get this very like, profit motivated, kind of half-hearted attempt to replicate someone else's success that was based on genuine innovation, right? Like that was like, "Oh, we see a gap in the market and we're going to create a product to fill that gap or to create a new SKU that people didn't even know that they needed." And then you get a lot of these imitators that come in and try to like just, "Oh, we'll just copy what Netflix is doing with our IP." And it's like, "Okay, sure." For some people that'll work, right? As you pointed out, Disney was a brand that owned enough IP that they could muscle their way in, right? But I think, unless you have this deep library of IP that you can leverage, or you have the ability to aggressively outspend your competitors like Microsoft, it's
Yeah, but even Microsoft has struggled with it. Who buys games on the Microsoft Store or the Xbox Store on PC? They don't. They buy them on Steam. They're still
well,
available there, but and
I was gonna say
I'd
that's
love
why
to see the stats, but a majority of people come to Steam.
but that's why they're trying to be a disruptor and do Game Pass because they're
I
trying to
feel like
get
that's
ahead of the
different
next
though. Like
gold rush.
a subscription service, I can agree that has some appeal, but what we're talking about here is just an annoying little thing where I either have to launch it and then launch it again because I bought it on Steam and you
Yeah, but
insist on showing me a shitty little window first, or I'm having to download a whole separate app and buy the game. Like a
but I think that
subscription, I can understand that, but
I think that you're thinking about it in 2024 mindset, and these were decisions that were made in 2011.
yeah,
Or
I 100% agree with you, and I think, but the company I cannot get over is Ubisoft. I cannot figure out what their strategy is. They seem to relaunch some games on Steam. I can go buy the whole Far Cry series right now on Steam, but other games like Star Wars Outlaws, I've got to buy it from their own
well, that
launcher, and it's just so bizarre to
I
me.
think that takes me back to the point that I was making about EA being like quote unquote concerned about Dragon Age selling more, right? Where it's like, there are probably some franchises where you can get away with putting it behind a wall garden, right? Like something like, we talked about Overwatch, we talked about World of
I
Warcraft.
wonder about that though, because I don't think you can anymore. There was rumors that PlayStation was talking about doing their own custom launcher, and I still think they probably will do something like that. We've seen achievements sinking and or whatever they call them,
Trophies.
trophies coming to their PC games, and maybe they do their own custom launcher. But I don't think it gets the traction. I just
No.
think people have had enough, and they want their games in one place.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right, but I guess that's the problem though, right? Is like, when you run a giant company, right? Like a multi-million, multi-billion dollar company in some of these cases, um, it's you can't turn a ship like that on a dime, right? Like it's like you're steering a cruise ship, not like a speedboat. And when you're talking about, and that's one of the things we talk about being the benefit of Valve being a smaller company is that they have the resources of a large company, but they're so much smaller by comparison to a lot of these other companies. And
Yeah, did you see how many employees they have? Like it came out like
I don't know
the
off the top of
number
my
of
head.
it was like the number of people that worked on their hardware division or something. It
Mhm.
all leaked as part of 200 as part of like a document this week. They only have
Uh,
336 people that work there.
That's crazy. Right? Like that's a crazy small amount of people working there compared to how many people work at PlayStation or Xbox or Nintendo or whatever, right?
Yeah,
So
and on
or
hardware
Ubisoft even, right?
hardware in 2021, it was just 41 people. 41 people were
That's crazy.
responsible for the Steam Deck and the Index and everything like that.
So my point there being that I think that when you have a situation like this, right, where it's like, okay, I work at EA now as a an executive, and what uh, 13 years ago somebody made the decision that we were going to do this launcher because of this issue with Crytek and Crisis, which is a franchise that you don't even really hear about ever anymore, right? So it's like
No,
it's
yeah.
this decision that was made 13 years ago, by somebody who's not there anymore and has become a status quo, and it was a thing that you invested years of effort and money into, and now there are a bunch of people whose jobs depend on it and all this. It's you built a house of cards around something that didn't make any sense, but it's like, we're 13 years in now though, right? So it's like, so what do we do, right? Like, do we like end the service and then we have to deal with the fact that we have all these customers that bought games on this launcher that we're not going to support anymore, and then does that mean we have to give them Steam keys,
I
or
really
how do we get
that
this?
is one thing I do not understand why companies have not done. Let me bring my game to Steam. Like, you can generate keys for free. They're your keys.
Yeah,
Just
but it's
give everyone the option to do it.
right, but now that you haven't, it's a thing, right? Like it becomes a problem. And it's not just a problem that you need to invest like dollars into, it's also a problem that you have to market, you have to explain it to people, you need to send emails to all the customers who are going to be affected. It's like a massive undertaking to do something like that. And if your motivation is, well, our fans say that they would rather buy our games on Steam, but they can still get them on Steam and they have to jump through like one extra hoop and we're not seeing it significantly impact sales, then yeah, it's like, why would you make that
But what about
decision?
those games that don't launch on Steam, and I am forced to use a custom launcher?
And
Because I
again,
think that's
that's
what
the thing
that's
is
what Matt Piscatella was talking about,
you can
right?
only
That
get away with that if your game is absolutely massive.
I could have seen it work for PlayStation for something like Spider-Man or God of War. People were really excited about that.
Right,
But
and then there it's putting something that you want so badly behind a walled garden that you're willing to jump
and
through an extra hoop. And do people feel that way about the 30th Assassin's Creed game, right? Probably not.
no, but I probably would do it for GTA 6. So it really is interesting that some games I'm just like, nah, fuck that. I'll just wait for it to come to Steam, or I'll play it on console, or I just won't play it at all. But other games are so fire that you just want to like play it at launch, and you're just like, well, I guess I'll grin and bear it. And I did that with Diablo 4, and I'm so annoyed that they then launched 6 months later on Steam.
And I think that that's the thing, right? Is when you look at a lot of these companies, like it's not insane that they thought that this would work, right? Like it's like FIFA is one of the biggest games in the world. They probably thought that they could force their audience over onto this launcher and that they would not have to pay any, other like person when money was changing hands, right? I'm sure with Ubisoft, like when they launched it, it was probably when Assassin's Creed was still on its absolute peak, and they thought that that would never slow down, right? And like it did. And I think that, to take it back to the streamer example, this is what happens, right? Like everybody enters the space and everybody invests money, and there's a point where there's a boom and everybody can coexist and it's all good. But then something happens, right? Like the market changes, a new skew, a new way to buy whatever comes out and disrupts things, or things outside of your control happen, like inflation goes up, or there's a recession and people have less money to spend. And the, 30, subscription services that they used to be all just handing money off to without thinking about, it's like, oh, I can't afford all this anymore. I need to start
It's
being
even
choosy.
even if you, like, take the subscription service out of it, I absolutely hate the fact that I just don't know where any movie is. I'm at the point where I've got to Google where I can watch something. Is it on Netflix? Is it on Amazon? Is it on Disney? And I feel like that's the same thing that gamers have. It's just like, okay, where did I buy this game? Did I buy it on Steam? Did I get it on Epic Game Store? Was it a GOG game? Did I get it on their shitty custom launcher? And I feel like people are so sick and tired of it. Everyone wants their games in one place, and that one place that we've all decided on that we like is Steam.
And I
And
think there's
and
also
I
the brand strength angle of it too, right? That like people don't like EA or Ubisoft. Like
no,
people like their
that
games sometimes, but
yeah.
the companies have a bad rep.
Yeah, and I feel like EA maybe has had like a been dealt a bad set of cards by previous CEOs, because I do think the current management have seemingly done a good job. You look at the games that they've launched, um, with Respawn and it seems like Dragon Age is going to probably do pretty well. They're listening to users. Skate's coming back, for example. It's
Yeah.
like
It
you
seems
know
like Vince Zampella and kind of that new era of leadership does seem to kind of, like, have an interest in fixing their image, but I think that this could be part of that, right? Is being like, "Hey, we're gonna move away from our shitty proprietary launcher that nobody likes and put the game out on Steam day and date." Isn't that an easy win? Yeah, it was. We're here talking about it for 45 minutes.
yeah, and I really hope that you're right, and this is the beginning of the end for custom launches. But I just see some companies are so stubborn. I can see Sony really wanting to double down and doing their own custom launcher. I really can see that they want to have their own
Yeah.
shitty, ugly overlay where you can see your fucking PlayStation friends
I
that are
think as long
online
as
at the
it's
same time.
optional in the same way that the Xbox stuff is, I think that's fine. I think if they're like,
But I don't think it will be optional because they're forcing everyone to make a PlayStation account now.
yeah, I don't
I
know.
have to have a PlayStation Network account, and if you don't, if there isn't the PlayStation Network in your country, well, tough tits. We're taking the game off of Steam there.
I could see it being a thing where it's like if you wanna buy the game, you can buy it on Steam or you can buy it on the PlayStation Store.
But even if I don't buy it on the PlayStation Store, I don't want your launcher to have to launch for then me to launch the game, or for you to
Yeah.
put other stuff there that I don't care about. I don't care about PlayStation Network trophies. I've got Steam achievements. I don't care about my PlayStation friends list. I've got Steam friends. I'm in a different ecosystem, and I feel like these companies all want to have their own little skin and their
Yeah.
own little flavor on top of it.
That's
Like,
the
it's just
I
annoying.
I think you're right. I think it makes more sense for platform holders to do that personally. I understand not wanting that. But I also think that like the idea that it's like, oh, well, like you're playing your PlayStation games wherever you're playing them, they're PlayStation games. Like you should be able to get trophies in them, right? Like if that's something you care about as part of being like part of the PlayStation ecosystem. Um,
Yeah, maybe, but do I need a launcher for that, or can I just not log in on the game?
I think that's reasonable. I mean, I don't know why you couldn't just log into the PlayStation servers that way and then it's just connected to your PlayStation account. I don't think there needs to be a launcher for that. But you know, again, it's like I could see them wanting to be like, well, if you want to just have like if you don't want to go
Mhm.
on Steam, if you want to just get your games through us, then you can, right?
I'd
Like,
do it if they launched PlayStation Plus and I could get my PlayStation Plus collection, and I could do all that, and they did that, and they went down the subscription route in the same way that I can get Game Pass on PC, then maybe that's an angle that I would consider, but I don't
yeah.
think they're gonna do that. I think it's gonna
No, I
be
think you're probably
some
right. It's probably going to be the 2024 version of this thing that we have said has sucked for 13 years. I think you're
yeah.
probably very correct about that.
I really don't want to see that, but I think that's what it's going to be. Every single time I play a Ubisoft game, I'm just like, oh, so 6 people have added me on Ubisoft Connect, and I can never figure out how the hell to erase these spam bots that have added me on Ubisoft Connect. I cannot figure it out at all. I don't care. It's like log
Just play
in.
it on
It's like
console, bro.
it's like
Like,
log into the Ubisoft club to claim your free stuff, and I'm just like, I don't want any of this. All I want to do
gang,
is run around and check boxes
I know
and shit.
I know that nobody on this PC centric podcast wants to hear that. Just stop buying Ubisoft games on PC. Just get them on console until they
No,
stop
because I
doing this
want to play it on
bullshit.
a handheld. I want
But
to play them on a
you
handheld.
gotta bully them out of there. You gotta bully them off that
Pete,
store. Like, look,
they
I'm
even
only
do
buying
it.
it on Steam. That's it.
They even do it on console now. You have to sign into the Ubisoft club. You have to have a fucking link your email address to your
Oh,
Xbox
I know.
account.
But it's like you do it once and then it leaves you alone. Like
I know.
the
Yeah.
like friends list and stuff isn't popping up and shit because it's on your Xbox, right? Or on your
That's so
PlayStation.
annoying. It comes up with like a custom little thing in the corner.
Yeah.
I'm just like, go away.
It's like literally
Nobody wants you.
like opens up like a, like early aughts like
Mm.
internet. It's like poof, it's like what
I
am I
feel like
doing?
I'm on AIM and
I
it's like coming up on the bottom. It's like bloop, bloop, bloop.
It reminds me of like logging into hotel Wi-Fi. It's like, what are we doing here? Like, why do I have to like go through like three, like
Yeah, it's like,
proprietary
please tell
web
me.
pages?
Yeah, it's like, please give me your name, date of birth, social security number, name of your firstborn child,
And then
and
we'll let you
your
play
bank
Assassin's
details.
Creed. But
Oh
yeah,
man.
I think that it might be. It really might be. Not that this game specifically or whatever is like gonna be the death blow, but like I do think that there's a non-zero chance that publishers look at if this game is a success, the success we saw with Helldivers of like, yeah, it just sells better if you put it out on Steam, period. And
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's gonna be the thing that motivates these companies to behave differently, right? Is always gonna be money, is always gonna be how is this affecting the bottom line, And I think as long as they can ignore that it's an issue, right? Like as long as it's just a thing that people complain about sometimes and not something that's like actively impacting the sales trajectory of a title, then I think that, they're not gonna.
It's gonna be publicly traded companies. Ubisoft's a private company. We're probably not gonna see them. It seems like Eves is at the top, and he just says what he wants to do. He's like, I want to get into NFTs, and everyone just does it, right?
Okay.
Whereas, EA, they're a publicly traded company. I think if it was like, okay, well, why didn't you sell as many? You could see an analyst maybe coming on the call or an investor and saying like, well, why didn't this game launch on Steam?
Right.
This competitor game came out that week and was number one on the charts, and we can see from Steam DB that it sold X number of millions of copies in a week, and it's just like, well, why are you not doing the same thing?
Right.
And so I feel like the maybe is the beginning of the end, and I think Steam Deck Verified is going to go a long way. And I do think that kind of Steam native and getting rid of these launches is got to go away. I'd love to see Valve put their foot down with them at some point and just be like, enough's enough. Like, come on, let's just
I
launch
don't
the
think they
game.
will because I don't think it affects them that much.
No,
And
they're still getting the money, and you
yeah,
just click play.
I think that they're happy to just play ball, right? And like if it's not something that's like clearly anti-consumer, then I don't think that they're gonna
Yeah,
do anything
the
about
only
it.
only launch I'm excited about, we spoke about on the Flip Screen Games podcast, is the Jackbox Mega Launcher.
That
I'm
is
very
great.
excited about that one. That
Awesome.
I can have all my Jackbox party backs in one place, and it can go straight to the game.
It's one more thing I want to throw out on this, and then I think I'm kind of my flags planted on this subject is I do think that I wouldn't be surprised if the Mass Effect Legendary Edition being launched on Steam was a motivating factor for this. Um,
I could see that. Yeah.
just because I bet you anything that that game sells insanely well on Steam every time
Oh,
there's a
it's
sale. It's
always
always
on
on sale.
sale.
And
Yeah.
again, right? Like it was a $60 box copy of games that are old and it sold exceptionally well at launch, like a new game. It probably does gangbusters every time it goes on sale. And you know, I bet you they can look at like, well, we put this game out. Here's all of the sales on Steam and here's all the sales on our native app, right? And even if that launcher has to come up, it doesn't matter, right? They can see where the sales came from. I would be so shocked if it was less than 75, 90% of sales came from Steam, right? And that they see that there's a spike every time there's a Steam summer sale, spring sale, winter sale, that somebody new buys this game for the first time, or somebody who, had played it on another platform, buys it a second time, whatever, right? That, those impulse purchases that just come with being in the Steam ecosystem are so valuable that you just can't ignore it. And like, why wouldn't you want to give that opportunity to this new game in a franchise that you're trying to, present as being this prestige thing that you want to jump in and be a part of?
Yeah, like, you're 100. I think you're kind of definitely on the money. I mean, you've only got to look at Helldivers, which has sold between 6 and 10 million copies on Steam. That's like compare
Wow.
compare that to
That's
Mass
nuts.
Effect Legendary Edition. It's around 1.5 million copies on Steam, according to SteamDB. So it's like you can launch if you launch a big game on Steam, you're gonna sell it. You just really are. Like, especially if it's Steam Deck verified. I really think Helldivers benefited from that. I don't think that game would have been anywhere near as big if it didn't launch day and date on PlayStation and on PC. And I think,
I mean, think about it. 1.5 million for remasters of old games is like something to sneeze at. That's pretty good, you know?
yeah, yeah. I wonder what Skyrim sold.
Oh my god, an insane amount.
Yeah,
But
because they launched like a separate SKU for that as well, didn't they? It was
yeah.
like the special edition or whatever it was called.
Yeah, yeah. Legendary edition or whatever. No, that's Mass Effect.
It was the Skyrim special edition.
Oh, okay. There you go. So yeah, I think you're right. I think that there's a non-zero chance that we'll see this more and more, and that the kind of like market on PC is truncating again because there's just not enough support for these like niche launchers that nobody wants to engage with. There's not enough profit to be had in maintaining them and putting your games out there exclusively. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if more and more publishers just
God,
kind of fall in line.
imagine if you're on that development team. There's only one other development team more hated than you, and that is Microsoft Teams. Like, seriously, like you're working on the EA app. Nobody wants your product. Nobody wants to use Microsoft Teams, but we're stuck with it. But we know we don't have to use the EA launcher. There's an alternative out there. It's like, come on. It's like if you start working at a company that's like Microsoft Teams and you just come from someone that uses Slack and you're just like, oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. So uh I am very interested to see whether or not, your theory about the game being more imminent than I think pans out, and also very much seeing like what state it launches in and whether or not this inspires more confidence in Steam Deck verification or if it kind of cements this idea that it's not something to be taken seriously.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping it launches sooner rather than later. I'm actually quite excited about this game now, Pete, and I'm interested to dig deep into the lore and
Let's
yap with you about it.
go! Let's go! I'm
The only thing
in.
is, if Ubisoft sees this and it's like actually Star Wars Outlaws is now Steam Deck native and Steam Deck verified, then I'm probably going to be playing that one instead.
I don't
So
think they're going to be that close together, so you'll be fine. You just got to be.
I do. I think they're
Nah, nah.
probably within a few
You
weeks of
got
one
at
another.
least 4 weeks to beat that game, and then play Dragon Age with me.
Okay, okay.
I'll tell you what, Steve. I'll give you. I'll guarantee you a trade. You want me? I'll play Hitman. I'll play all of
Oh
them.
my god, yeah, all
I'll
of
do
them.
it. I'll do it. All three of them. If you play this game, if you
What
gotta
you? It's
you
just
gotta play
one
it to
game now. It's
completion
just
though.
one game
You
now.
gotta you gotta roll credits on this some bitch, and then I'll play any other game. Any other game you want.
Well, I need to look at the how long to beat first and see see how long it is before I commit to this.
You have to commit to it right now. I'm just saying, like I'm putting that offer on the table. If you play this game and you actually engage with it and finish it with me, I'll play whatever you want.
Look, Pete, I don't finish games. I get my fill of them, and I'm just like, you know what, it was good,
Yeah,
and I
and
move
I'm
on.
trying to break that of you. You got to finish some games,
You know,
man.
I do. I finished Starfield last year, and I had a good time. You didn't finish Starfield, but I finished
No, you're
Starfield, and it
right.
was good.
You're right.
And I'm excited for the DLC, potentially called Starborn.
That's
So,
probably how I'm gonna get back into it, if I'm honest.
yeah.
I was thinking about playing it again recently after I just finished Fallout, and I
You're
was like,
just like, "You know what? This would
"Ooh,
be great on the deck."
yeah, be pretty good. Head out to space, you know? We'll see." So, thanks, folks, for joining us here in another episode of the Steam Deck Podcast. If you guys want to write in with your thoughts on the future of third-party launchers, on the Steam Store's supremacy, or on Dragon Age Veilguard, definitely write in and let us know all the ways that you can. You can hit us up at flipscreen.games. That's our website where you will find links to all of the places that we are, all over the web, all the ways that you can get involved in the community or show your support, or you can get links to our sister shows, Nintendo Noise and the Flip Screen Games podcast, where we talk about everything going on in the world of non PC gaming. So go over there and check some stuff out. However, you choose to get involved and show your support, it really does help us out quite a bit. And we really appreciate you tuning in to another episode of the Steam Deck podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.